Okay, do it. Hi,
Correct.
everybody. Welcome to Economic Space TV. My name is Joel Mason, Chief of Staff and Technical Writer for the ECSA Network. Joined today with Exceli Virtanen, Dick Bryan, Jonathan Beller, and Jorge Lopez. And to discuss, excitingly, this show is about the magic gifts of the economic space protocol, to kind of introduce how that relates to the economic white paper that we've been going through, and to introduce that, and to also get into some of the particular ones, because there's like 12, I think, now. They keep on growing, so they seem very, very magic, these features, and they are quite exciting. So yeah, it's good. It's good that we were able to pull this one together. There was I made a few scheduling faux pas, but we made it. And so hope everybody watching this later, good to see you, and thanks for traveling with us to the YouTube channel, even though we switched the hour on you at the last minute. Oh, but here's Pablo. There we go. So I think maybe a few announcements first before we get started. A good portion of the kind of the ECSA Network team is working in upstate New York right now, and with soulful connections to those in Mexico and in Berlin and in other places. And we've been working on a bunch of different things that are really exciting, but maybe just I'll pass it over to Exceli to share one really wonderful aspect of that.
Sure. So yeah, we can a kind of a little bit of an announcement that the economic paper is coming out as a book by the Minor Compositions publisher from UK, and it's a really great publisher, good series, and it looks like we're going to get it out a little bit quicker than we even thought. So we're right now thinking about cover. Pablo, you might need some help. And the final edits, and we should have it final form ready now by the end of next month, and hopefully physical copies for the May event at the Commons Hub in Austria, I think.
Yeah, we might as well plug the Commons event in May too, while you're at it. Yeah,
so we know that Matt Slater and some other friends are organizing an event in Austria at Felix's place, Commons Hub. There, I think it's the third week of May, like May 22nd or something like this, when the event starts, and some other good friends from Informal Systems at least are coming, and maybe some other people too. So we are really starting to put together the living laboratory for collaborative finance. That's the aim.
Yeah, so come out to that event if you want. We'll roll some cheese down the hills. Is that what they do? That don't I feel like I'll probably anger both groups, the ones that actually do it and the Austrians that are like, we would never. Thanks, Exceli. So yeah, excited to be able to kind of hear from all of us today, but especially Jorge. And I love the way that Jorge brings such clarity to some things that are technical and philosophical at once. And we do so many things in the ECSA project, and I think when Exceli and Jorge started writing these out in jam sessions, I started to get really excited, because they kind of name different processes on different capabilities, different features of what you'll be able to do in the economic space protocol, and that just kind of makes it I just find it more tantalizing. I spend time thinking about each of them, even though they're interrelated, as Jorge will say. So with that, I want to pass it on over to kind of an introduction.
Just before Jorge jumps in, I just want to say, because I wanted to sort of slightly recast the tone of our connection here, which I know is within my rights. We agreed, as we were talking about these 12 magic gifts, that this is a kind of a working paper session, and that this is not a definitive presentation of the materials. So I think what I would hope to do now is sort of like go through these features and discuss these features and evaluate, the way they're expressed, maybe elaborate them, But let's not assume that what we're hearing right now is like a final version of anything. I mean, as I expressed, I actually not too fond of the notion of magic gifts in the first place. That might just be prejudicial on my part, which is not a criticism of the content. But if we're creating a document which is going to represent X in some way, there might be some debate about how that works. And
Sure,
effectively,
sure.
live debate. So
Yeah. I can. Should I share the document, Jorge? Or basically, anyway, it's absolutely like we're working on this, like, and everybody knows we're like right now working on our like communications and messaging a little bit. So we are like, and I think we're getting somewhere with the articulations now.
So thank you for opening and sharing the screen, actually. So yes, just to add to what Jonathan said, and also emphasize again what Joe said about this being the result of a jamming session in trying to bring a different form of framing to the different features. And I would say that the objective, and this is something I've expressed to Axeli, is to start giving space to each one of us as authors within this space, instead of struggling to find a unified voice, which fortunately we don't have due to our diversity of backgrounds. So I think it's great to seek a final sort of like position that we can all agree to. But I think that is a much more, for messaging, much more onerous task than just simply sharing from our own perspective, as educated or uneducated as it might be, whatever it is that we have to contribute to the discourse more transparently, without having to filter it through any form of consensus. So I also would like to claim the right to hold a posture that may or may not be shared by everyone.
Great.
awesome.
Yeah. Hey, maybe before
Awesome.
I'll just also one more thing before we go. This document then accidentally showed this document, which I can also tell that we've been working on this update doc for the close collaborators, and we are about to send it very soon. So we'll explain a little bit like what is going on, and this is part of this
that
process.
Effort gave rise to it. Yeah, that effort gave rise to it.
But go ahead.
So again, to explain the rationale of how it emerged, it's in noticing that we can describe the very same thing from different discourses and different perspectives, and just have completely different answers, right? One of the things we notice is like, it depends when we're describing what we're doing, or like this protocol to different audiences, we end up with a entirely different answers, because different discourses and different audiences emphasize and care about only certain aspects, sometimes at the exclusion of others. So framing it as not as a formal statement of what is financially, or what it is economically, or what it is computationally, but rather like more like in a cheeky tone, right? Like these are gifts that you get, and like whoever likes this particular gift, take it, and if you don't care for it, it's a gift anyway, so nothing wasted, right? So I really like this idea of the gift, which is part of a suggestion from Axeli, right? Like the gifts of a particular proposal, particular narrative. So yeah, it's basically the attempt to capture different, like a financial perspective, economic perspective, computational perspective, social perspective, governance perspective, right? In these ones, in a way that we can give a little bit of a bigger picture of what it is, without constraining ourselves to any one particular discourse. So the suggestion from Joe was originally to focus on one, and I'm happy to do that. But I hear also on the table like to sort of analyze and discuss and dissect. I'm not so keen actually on create like an internal critique. I think that will emerge regardless. I think that I rather stick to spirit without you know, like which is like basically sharing of the views again, from in this case, Axeli and me, and just yeah, showing what we got, and hopefully what will emerge is a much more robust set of communication materials from it. But I don't know if this is the objective of this session. That's not what was communicated to me. So if that's okay, we can go to the first gift that you wanted to that you suggested, Jonathan. Sorry, Joe. Yeah.
As you guys wish.
Yeah, I would do it. So let's talk about one of the gifts. It was the dividend.
Just the church spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, as a part of these gifts, one of the, I think, simplest sort of shifts in terms of redefining what equity means, but also necessary components of the system in order to pursue a post-capitalist agenda, or in which the objective is to go beyond profit as the only means of value capture. Then we have this capacity to define what a surplus is, right? So surplus does not need to be framed only as credits. It's sort of like a bias that our current system presumes of as the agreement for shareholders. But in this case, shareholding, that means having stake on something, right? And that as a financial agreement, it divides a whole into shares, into parts. And that information signifies that there is a distribution of the value being created according to the percentages of the whole, like in equity. But unlike equity, those benefits, those surplus, the value production, doesn't need to convert it into credits, right? Whether it's fiat, whether it's currency, whether it's whatever it is, credit. It doesn't need to be converted into like a universal form, so to speak, of for value exchange. It actually can be directly distributed. Like for instance, and this is just an example. Like if it was a stake on a farm, you get shares on so many apricots, so many pumpkins, so many according to your shares, right? So, and this is again a crude example. It doesn't mean that that's the only thing that you can do, because sometimes we run the risk of confusing the example with a feature. But it is the capacity to denominate different forms of distributable value capture devices or instruments that then can be distributed according to the shares, right? So this is particularly important for instance, performances that are immaterial, and basically it's just the recognition of a funding or value contribution towards the execution of a particular performance, right? These can be subdivided, and these performance tokens are one of the many things that can be used as carriers of surplus. And that's why you use the word dividend, right? It's because it's dividing the whole according to the shares information. So yeah, if there's any more clarity needed for that, I'll be super happy to expand. And I don't know if you want to read it as is actually. In the screen is too small for me, but that might also be valuable. Yeah,
I think that'd be great to read it. Yeah.
Do you want to do it, Joel? Or
can you? Yeah. Sure. Can you make it a little bit bigger?
Yeah, it's really small. There you go.
So if you can hear me, okay.
Yes.
A new surplus definition: multi-denominational dividends. An economic space accounts for its surplus as stake appreciation, not money accumulation. The ESP, Economic Space Protocol, does not define surplus as a positive balance of credits as with profit, but as a positive change in stake price. The stake valuation includes the balance of other tokens, including other participants' stake tokens, commodities, and credit. An economic space can hold a surplus in its treasury or distribute it as dividends that do not need to be transformed into credits, but can remain in the same underlying tokens. An economic space's stake tokens represent access to its underlying performance, resulting outputs and network assets.
So yes, in addition to what I said to introduce it, it's also the part that, and this is important, right? That this also enables us to price stake again relative to the common understanding of how equity works, simply by appreciation. Rather than, so basically in financial terms and accounting terms, current accounting terms will be, instead of realized profit, will be like unrealized profit and loss, right? Because it's also, it can go both ways. But even though the term profit already biases towards the possibility of
so
making the unrealized realized.
Say something about how it is different than the profit, the balance. Oh, sorry, I think I have a bit of delay here. Yeah, just wondering if you could say a little something about the positive balance of credits as with profit versus the positive change in stake price.
Yeah, that in its unrealized form, the change in price is just one more metric among many to measure the stake values and stake values. And it's definitely informed by all these other metrics, right? Because the necessity to come up with a valuation is an artifact, a consequence of its exchangeability. So every time you can exchange something, you need to be able to commensurate it against, let's say in this case, other stakes, right? So we need to be able to measure them, but that measure is projected into it. Basically, what is the drawn offer, right? What is the last stake per unit of stake price that was registered in the market, and that can be utilized to come up with its exchange value, what we're calling the unrealized profit and loss in a capitalist profit-centered scenario. But in here, we claim that it is although we could create an economic space that converts into profit, that means into credits and distribute those credits. The fact that it is not constrained only to that modality gives us the right not to call it just simple surplus and multi-denominational dividends, right? Because that is just one choice, right? And one of the reasons or one of the implicit goals of the economic space protocol is to be backwards compatible with capitalism, right? That means that it reframes many of the accounting notions in a way that are less limiting, right? And in this case, profit it's one of those, right? So, but we replace it with notion of surplus. And again, when even though a change in price can be framed as an unrealized profit, it's not it would not be profit until it would be converted into a money instrument or a credit. We just define credits here.
Can I just jump in there? Because I think that's super interesting. And it sets up a beautiful sort of paradox or psychological situation in which, someone who has a portfolio of tokens effectively as their stake is kind of engaged in a process of nominally being able to convert it into the value form and say, well, this is actually, if I collapse all this down, this is worth, X number of dollars. But at the same time, the protocol encourages the stakeholder to have this portfolio and recognize the values in that portfolio for their qualitative character and their qualitative potentials.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes, it
And-
opens the
Yeah, and that sort of double consciousness in relationship to value, I think, is one of the things that the protocol is building towards. And in that sense, I mean, I'm finally like coming to this term gift a little bit, which I started out criticizing. I can see that is sort of a gift, right?
Mhm.
You know, and I mean, I get the rhetoric of that. I think it's an important formulation. On the other hand, I think it's also been our burden and our obligation to answer some of the problems that we've recognized in historical economy and address those things in the most responsible and careful way that we possibly can. So in another way, it's been, you know, the gift of the times to give us, you know, such an interesting role to play. So I'm just like, you know, this is my critique of the gift is just about authorship, like whose is it to give to whom, I guess. And that's just sort of like a rhetorical question about this document. But I love this sort of double consciousness that the protocol will enable, you know, once it's deployed. And I think that's exactly what this is about.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you love it, because I don't know how it's going to play out. Really. I mean, I know how I would handle it, but we never know, like, at scale, if we are going to be able to succeed in creating that double consciousness. And ideally, what I would love to see again is like new forms of value transfer that are not necessarily predicated on exchange, for instance. And again, this allows it, or like atomic exchange, but this allows it, right, by just framing exchange as just one of many possibilities of measuring. If a particular token is being set forth, offered in a market, is one more bit of information that we can derive from the network, but it's not the only means of value access or value distribution.
Yeah. I'd like to just say a couple of little things there. One is taking John's statement as a point of departure, but then moving into the more measurement issues that Jorge was posing. The concept of surplus, of course, is a very old concept that, you know, that it was being used for you know, as almost as soon as there was that notion of social aggregation. So it goes back 500 years or more, as soon as there was the recognition of any social totality. And so we also have to recognize that surplus arises in specific historical circumstances that we shouldn't lose. So invoking the concept of surplus is also a historical reference, with all the virtue and the baggage and the social relations of the past imbued in it. And inheriting that term does give us a particular meaning and a particular reference to the past, which I think John was referring to. The other thing I'd want to say, though, is that the term was most recently used in historical phases in feudalism. You know, that's a term we can use to describe the stage before capitalism, where the surplus would be the form of an extraction by the lord from the tenant farmers. So it automatically took multiple forms, and it wasn't automatically presumed that those different crop extractions would be converted into a price to measure profit, because they were going to be consumed on the farm, and some of it would be traded, but by no means all of it, because the goal was not to realize profit. We're sort of going back into that world a little bit, I think, where we're wanting to say that the creation of outputs, we want to value the outputs themselves as use values, and then the network wants to value them as use values, not just that they are convertible to a monetary denomination. So if that gives us a slight feudal twist, you know, I can wear that. But I would just like to say why it features that it must be realised, the surplus, as in state change rather than in the adding up of output prices. And that is because we want to be able to say that outputs, production processes, performances as we call them, can create a surplus even if nothing goes to market. If you produce output for the commons, you're still producing a surplus. if we have to try and measure the value of the surplus by the value of outputs reduced to a single unit, we automatically miss that which is produced for the commons. And insofar as we're trying to embed not just a commons, but a growing commons, it would be short-sighted, to say the least, to try and measure output prices. So what we're trying to measure is the propensity of agents in the network to undertake performances that produce outputs, whether those outputs go to market or not. And so we're wanting to measure how the network values those performances. And stake is the measure of the value of performance as distinct from the measure of the particular outputs that come from the performance. So you can say, gee, there's a massive surplus that's being produced from this activity that is producing goods for the commons. We declare a surplus here, but it's going to show up as the willingness of people to stake the production of that output, not in terms of the output itself. And I think that's an important little twist that we've got to put into our calculative system to enable the commons. And it's not the sole reason we measure through stake price, but in this context of measuring the surplus, I think it's a pretty important ingredient.
So that's super interesting. I actually hadn't understood that aspect of what's going on here before, which is kind of fascinating to me. But so you're saying, just to put a really concrete example, if we're producing clean air, or non-pollutant, not polluting activities, we're not going to tokenize the record of how clean the air is. But if people are willing to, even if we can measure it, right? So that doesn't create a token issuance, which then says, oh, this is clean air. I mean, what I hear you suggesting, correct me if this is wrong, is that people will see that metric, and if they're willing to continue to stake it because they think they're doing a good job, that's the metric.
Yes. Yes, that's my take.
Yeah.
So the surplus has to be measured through stake price, because that's the only way of executing that process you described, John, either in an individual case or in an aggregate case. And if we got to the aggregate case, we'd have to get to the unit of account. But let's not clutter in this context with that issue.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, you're mute.
If I,
Sorry. Yeah.
oh, I was just going to say, if you can hear me, some things are breaking up for me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm just going to say, if I understand right, yeah, thinking about, the new surplus definition and what you're saying there, Dick, like that by not converting it, it's also in the context of the economic space protocol, holding these different tokens as the surplus also allows that surplus to remain active in the commons already. Would you say that it doesn't have to be delivered to the commons, unlike the feudal system, where the surplus is held by someone who has it, right? But if it's impacted by, and maybe this is why Jorge was saying, it's hard to describe just one gift because they relate to each other, like, that it's already distributed, the surplus, it's already passed out. Is that correct way of understanding that?
Yes, but it needs to be declared as a surplus. We could say it's already there, but if we're entering the exercise of measurement, we want to say that act of clean air production has involved the creation of a surplus. It's already been created. So surpluses are always declared in retrospect. In any system, profit's always declared in retrospect, but the outputs are there, and then do they sum at the end of the year into a profit? Yes or no? So the same would apply here as an accounting exercise, that it's already done and then it's accounted for. But there are incentives, because it can involve the production of a surplus. There are incentives to actually produce for the commons.
Dick, by using the verb declare, by declaring you mean made validated as an exchange in the market, and therefore with that basically stating a change in price for its stake as a whole. Is that what you mean by declare?
It could be. If I were to give that a completely honest answer, and I don't want to mess up the turn all the gifts into one, because it's always nice unwrapping different presents, isn't it? Rather than Unwrapping
One
all at once.
complicated.
It's all the same underlying you.
If we actually play the play into existence in this discussion the idea of credit, then the form of declaration says, does production for the commons clear credit?
Yes.
And so in that, I'm just using the term declaration in it to mean network acknowledgement, and not just a thumbs up network acknowledgement, but a quantifiable network acknowledgement, which will play itself out through credit.
Awesome. So that is actually one question I wanted to ask you as a follow up. So just to frame this follow up question to what you said, Dick, I see the capacity of the state to value both immaterial and material things as a spectrum, right? Like on one hand, we can go into like this side of the spectrum, which everything must be quantifiable in scarce sort of units, right? Like countable things. And you need to account for the cost of those things. And the only reason of existence of that counting is because you're going to derive through their assemblage, through their resale, or, like redistribution, some sort of profit as a dividend. That's one side of the spectrum. On the other side of the spectrum, we have like maybe a purely material endeavor, in which it's just a performance, a set of actions, activities, events that are happening out there that have been measured, and those qualities are the information that the holder of stake is utilizing to value it in the market, either to hold or to sell. So those are the two extremes, and in between is any combination of both, like part material, part immaterial. There's obviously things that are activities that are going to need being funded and resourced. There's others that are just happening out there, and they just need to be measured. So there's a whole spectrum. So my question is, within this framing you're giving about like these different ways of measuring surplus, and what you just said about like credit clearing, basically paying, financial recognizing a performance being the form of network validation, where does the accounting of the costs, so to speak, factor in this description that you're and the definition of surplus in this description that you're giving?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I agree. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I understand what you're saying about the spectrum, and I would say, if we design the unit of account correctly, right, we can recognize that spectrum and say, hey, that they can all be alive. We don't have to delimit the measure. But in terms of counting costs, I would say the way I framed it, and let's stick with John's illustration of the production of clean air, that an agent undertakes processes of production of clean air. People who stake it are recognizing its value, but only the people who are staking it. So it's actually not full network recognition. It's sub-network recognition by the people who are keen on staking clean air. Mm-hmm. Full network recognition comes from the willingness to say that this surplus that it is created, the declaration of a surplus, is the willingness the willingness of the network as a whole to declare that clean air production can be used to write down credit as a performance of the network. How do we take the cost on? I believe my answer would be that's up to the individual performer of the network to say, am I prepared to do another? Am I prepared to reproduce my operation? Am I prepared to do another circuit of clean air production? Or is it more expensive than I've said? So it's not going to be viable. That would have to be an individual determination, I believe, because what's triggering the network is the reproducibility of production, and that depends on the creation of surpluses, and it's up to the individual performer to declare what their costs are.
Can I just respond quickly too? In terms of I've been really trying to think about the psychology of the platform participants in a way. I mean, not there's a single psychology, but just what these situations require psychologically and kind of mentally in order to participate. What's kind of being designed, what kind of heads are being kind of designed or imagined. And so if someone's producing clean air and I say, that's great, I'm into that, I want to stake that. Part of it, I mean, in an old school financial model, that's my charity, right? That's my altruism working, right? And that's a very limited idea of what it means to collaborate and build community together. Because actually, I'm taking some of my own productivity and turning it towards this thing and sharing the outcome with the community. And it's a very different sort of imaginary about the collective sharing of stake. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here, and what would motivate people to validate these practices for the sake of the commons or for ecology with their own futurity, so which is their stake, right? So to me, all this, I mean, I just want to say one more thing about this, because if this structure sort of functions the way we're thinking about it, the compilation of stake and the production of performances is a non-extractive set of relationships, right? I mean, we're actually finding new ways to work together in order to like create this emergent form. But we do have this discourse around profit, and like I think in Chelsea we had this conversation, which I just want to bring back here for a second, about where does that profit actually come from? And I mean, and others might not agree with this completely, but I just want to like put something out there. We don't have to talk about it. I just want to set it up as something. What I started to realize in this conversation, and what I think is going on, is because we're creating communitarian ways, non-extractive ways of producing things. If profit comes into the ECSA ecosystem, it's because of arbitrage. It's because of the arbitrage on capital itself, because we're doing things that actually cost less to produce or are organized differently from capital. And it's the capitalist system which is going to like bring money into the ECSA platform, because basically we're doing things, at less cost, either to the environment or the way that we measure. And that becomes a really interesting dynamic, right? Because all of a sudden the world starts to say, wait a minute, let's put our resources in this other modality of production, this innovation, which is collectively shared and happening in order to foster that innovation. At a certain point, maybe the capitalist world starts to shrink and maybe goes out, and the ECSA world explodes, and becomes sort of like the way of organizing things. I know that sounds a little grandiose, but I'm just trying to show the difference between sort of a production organized around extraction and production organized around cooperation.
Exactly, that's correct. I think, Jonathan, and it's because it's really a tendency. I really see as a force, and it will drive people really, because like you were saying, it's like this new form of subjectivity which actually understands that if the economic space is not good, they're going to not stick around, and kind of the competition moves on this level, like who is able to create the like a good economic space for all the participants and users. They will go there. It's very clear to me. Hey,
so
and that's why we've got to distinguish ourselves from an economy simply based on philanthropy. I mean, there can be philanthropic emotion that gets you in there, but this system to be self-reproducible, which is what we're aspiring to, can't just rely on injections of external funds called philanthropy. We want to make philanthropy profitable or surplus producible is the better word. Yeah.
Hey, I have one question to Jorge still. Like, you remember that? Like
me too.
Like when we used to talk about stake as, well, basically, I want to go back to the dividends a little bit. So you remember, like you explained it really great that the stake, it's really a pipe. And what kind of and the dividends are kind of then what start to flow there.
A pipe,
right?
Or a pie.
And that.
Are you hungry?
Pipe. Like a
Steak,
pipe.
well, you said steak
like
pie, and I'm like,
steak pie. I heard that also for a little bit. We should say something about our psychology, So, yeah, a pipe. a pipe. So yeah, basically, as a financial instrument, but also as a networking protocol, stake is it's a value carrying instrument. So basically, value flows through it, and the whole network, actually, all values, whether it's credit or commodity, they're all traveling through the system through stake pipes, right? Like, and how big the stake is how much it can flow. That's and often, I mean, Axelia and I have been talking about that, and I don't think I have talked much about that particular sort of computational feature of the protocol with everyone else, and it has consequences probably beyond the scope of this session, and I'd love to talk about those. But what is relevant here is that basically stake already presuppose an underlying value to be distributed, because it is a value distribution instrument.
Yes.
By definition. So and this is where this idea of the dividends comes from, right? Like, if you have stake, you're immediately implying these values that will be distributed through the stake that necessarily need to be divided in proportion to the stake holding every time one of these is sort of like sent through it, or let's using this terminology, recognized by the network as a dividend or as a valuable, which is something else I want to come down to. But not without asking first, would a financial / market based re-encoding and / accounting based re-encoding of these terms of like validating, like declaring, or that for instance you're utilizing, will it be valuable to sort of like do this transcoding, this translation in different terms, just to explain from an account / financial perspective what it means or what it implies, but also to confirm with you, Dick, that we're on the same page in here, because all of this is still coherence in this understanding is still something that is still emerging, right, between the economic discourse and the accounting discourse and computational discourse. So will that be valuable to do?
Yes.
Now, just explore a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes, Dick?
Yes.
Can I ask
First,
a dividend
I had to think,
question?
then I had to press. Joel, please.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, to give other people's brains a chance to catch up, as mine is trying to. This is great.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask also about the dividends, and dividends of stake, and because you say stake is a pipe, not a pie.
Mhm.
That
A pie too,
that
because you
a pie
divide the
too.
whole.
Now we're
It's
talking.
a pie. It's a pie chart.
I'm invested. Yeah. That stake always kind of implies that you hold it, right? You don't sell it, or you can, but then you don't have it anymore. So
yeah,
is there something about the ESP that changes it from something that you hold to more of a pipe like structure, or is that misunderstanding some of the relations there?
It's both. So when you hold it, it's like you're holding the other side of the pipe, so you can get what's coming through it. If you sell it, you no longer have access to that side of the pipe, so you get it to someone else. So this is true for equity too, right? We can understand equity also as a value distribution device. So that's sort of like the financial family roots.
That's great.
That state has. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that's great.
So
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, just to restate what I believe to be Jorge's question, particularly for people who are looking at this who aren't so familiar with what we might be talking about. The question is, when you measure, and of course measuring is the precondition for the construction of accounts. We've got to have an agreement about the units you're measuring. So the question then is, do you ultimately need to come down to a single measure? And if so, how do you construct it? And one way of constructing it might be to say, Well, ultimately, everything will either achieve a price directly, or it will be an input into something that will achieve a price. So that even production for the commons will create an environment in which processes of production which go to market. I'm not even going to try and pick an illustration off my head, but there'll be an input into that, into social harmony, into collective security that will make the economy more oriented towards producing priceable goods. And you will then get a price somewhere up there, and you can deconstruct the inputs backwards to run a price measure on everything, which would look somewhat like a convoluted, but importantly convoluted way to get to standard accounting practices. The other way of thinking about it is to say we want the unit of account both to be determined within the network, which of itself is not incredibly challenging because it could still give a single unit. But I think what's sort of interesting and exciting and has to be probed here is, can we preserve multiple units of account so that these ledger entries are done according to the attributes that individual agents who A, are the performers, B, the stakers, C, the consumers of those outputs, that they all agree on? Do they have to eventually come down to a single unit? And I think my own view on that, and I've got to say, I'm not a statistician, so I'm not going to wax lyrical about the simplicity of the process, is that for as much as possible, I think a distributed system would like to preserve a range of units of account. Ultimately, what will be revealed is that any particular unit of account will only be recognised within part of the circuit, because not everyone is going to say, I'm a clean air fiend. Other people might say, it's much more important to me to give production to homeless people. But what you can do to ultimately commensurate the network and declare stake is indexify these things. So you can weight the network's unit of account by some meta index that is consciously just an index. It's not trying to say, we think of everything but in the one unit, the way all these different outputs of the world are reduced to a measure of profit. We can hold open the multiples as much as possible, and then only get the meta index in, a weighted meta index, when we want to declare what those of us inside this conversation might call general stake, what for everyone else might be declared the GDP, the output of this network. If we want to reduce that to a single figure, we've got to have an index. That would be my take on this.
So just to make sure that we're understanding each other, Dick, and utilizing now our accounting artifacts, so I can ground it in protocols. I want to differentiate between a metric or a performance index, as we've called it before, and a unit of account. So let's first recognize, when we're speaking about unit of account, we're saying accounting units. That means that in the ledger, things that can go as a ledger record that says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those, right? So basically, a unit of account is the minimum indivisible thing that can be counted on the ledger for whatever that thing is, right? Whether it's an apple or whether it's a dollar, it doesn't matter. It goes in the ledger. So basically, unit of accounts is an accounting artifact, and basically it's a countable category that can be added tracked in the ledger as an asset or liability, because it is the implication of ledgerization, right? So, and the next one, and which is different from these projected measurements, indices that you're speaking of, right? That doesn't necessarily need to be in any ledger, but can be derived from information in the ledger and from other sources too. What you're talking about, like this sort of like an index of this portfolio of different things, in order for, we're talking about creating a particular measurement that can supersede or just leave along the exchange value. But what I would say is that the reduction to a singular unit, it's itself an artifact. It's unescapable, and it's always possible. It's an artifact of just accounting and exchange. Basically, whenever we have a record of this or that, it doesn't matter whether you want to translate everything into apples, costing apples or pears or dollars or our own abstract unit of account. You can commensurate everything just through the information that we have in the exchange record. So the question is like, what is the use of, when do we want to collapse everything into one measure, and when we don't want to do that, right? So because it's that is what we're playing with. It's like, we don't need to presuppose that it's always needs to be collapsed in that particular basically exchange value, because it's exchange value in the end, right? Whichever unit we choose to recognize as pricing. Price is exchange value. So if we recognize that we don't need to always to rely on that metric, and then we have alongside of these other metrics in order to evaluate whether we hold or not, right? We might be very well losing in exchange value for reduced number of people interested, but we're holding because for ourselves these other metrics represent much higher value, right? So and that is okay, even though maybe our own portfolio, the value, right, might be increasing, even though the stake value it's decreasing, because this particular thing relative to the rest of the portfolio is actually making it more diversified. They are interdependent, or like, you know, like there's much that opens up when we try to get away from the notion of collapsing everything into exchange value, and with that also the necessary conversion into credits, right? So keeping it in the uncollapsed state allows for much more reconfiguration and modulation possibilities than when we collapse it into that particular form.
Yeah. And just sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going
to.
Sorry, John. I would just say, I think that's, as you've posted, that's absolutely right. And what's beautiful about the technological capacity of our network is that you can hold the collapsed version. I mean, if we were time constrained, you'd want to say you want to do the collapsing to the collective unit at the last minute. But then, of course, we'd say, that then would feed back into valuations that people would find deceptive. Well, you know, bloody hell, I was doing all this good work because my little subgroup thought it was fantastic. And now you're telling me that the network index says it's not. But since we have the capacity that the economic media that we're constructing gives the capacity to feed back both the aggregate measure and the localized measure at the same time, it becomes a decision exercise for the performers and the people staking the performance to say, we value it like this. The rest of the network in aggregate, not in voice, but in statistical aggregate, actually values it a bit differently. How are we going to react to that aggregate network valuation? Are we going to back ourselves and keep going and saying, we'll persuade these people that we're actually on a winner? Or are we actually out of line with the network? So you've constantly got that ability to reposition yourself if you choose that. And for me, you know, while Hayek wanted to talk about the miracle of market processes in relation to central planning, here we have an instance of that we can have the centralized version and the decentralized version articulating with each other in very clear, understood by members of the network, clear and understood terms, and that just to me feels like a social miracle of valuation, if we're going to have gifts and miracles.
Yeah, it's a protocol. It's a yeah.
I mean, what I was going to say is along those lines. I mean, it's because, I mean, if we sort of collapse everything to a single unit of account, and that is some general stake or some extra unit of account, I mean, in effect, at that moment, it's an alternative currency, right? I mean, it's a system of valuation which is comparable to any other unit of account, which collapses its economy into single values that they call price. So, and I think that will actually be part of the experiential calculus of what it means to work in the ECSA economy. People will not be able to fully ignore the sort of market value of their stake, you know, in one dimension. But what's interesting is that, I mean, as exactly what you were saying, Dick. I mean, as if you can understand your activity and your relations in that unit of account, but also as this kind of qualitative portfolio, as you were describing, you can then make decisions about, you know, what matters, you know, to you, and a group can also make decisions about what matters to them, which, you know, are the indexes around particulars in a portfolio actually more important than the so-called bottom line. And the network as a whole might ultimately provide a kind of security of relation where the importance of that single unit of account decreases over time. I mean, that's a transitional narrative, right? You can't just will it away. It's going to be part of everybody's calculus all the time, because that's how we're trained. You know, that's the liquidity preservation has been, you know, the driving force of capital expansion. If you're insolvent, you're subject to like anything, whatever, right? And so people will always think about their solvency. But, you know, increasingly with the security of the relationality, you can move away from the ultimate deciding factor of the unit of account as in a single dimension.
Right. So there's like this sense in which the interconnection, this is what I keep on asking, like, you know, and when I'm kind of probing the system, the parts that are kind of verifiably interconnected through stake. And we were talking about this, so what social behavior difference does that start to create in our experience of affect and our experience of where value is? Because those aren't just numbers, but actually things that move through our bodies as well. I know that Jorge has to go, right? Is that right?
Is it time already?
It's time already. Yeah. So I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Thank
you.
Jorge has to.
Yeah, I
need
to go. Yeah.
Okay. So thanks so much to everyone to coming to this episode of Economic Space TV, the third one. The next one will be the fourth one, surprisingly. Some numeracy for you. And yeah. Thanks so much, Jorge. If folks want to stay around and chat a bit, say hi, that'd be great. But everyone out there in TV land, ciao, ciao.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Great.
Ciao.